Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. My name's Don Arleth. The Coalition of the Willing met in London today and online as well, reaching an agreement to establish headquarters in Paris and finalize plans for a future contingent to be deployed to Ukraine. However, one major element remains elusive, which is crucial to this plan's implementation, and that is a ceasefire. And now joining me to discuss the details of this plan and more is Reuben F. Johnson, Research Fellow at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. Sir, great to have you. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Now, Zelensky says Germany is ready to pay for 2 Patriot systems, Norway for 1. Speaking in Rome, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said Germany was prepared to buy Patriot air defense systems from the United States and provide them to Ukraine. So tell us a bit about this system and how it can protect the Ukrainian capital.
Right now, the Ukrainians have 6 batteries. So if the Germans paid for 2, the Norwegians paid for 1, that would bring them up to 9. They probably need more, like 15. I would say perhaps even more, because there are limitations. You know, you can only cover so much area. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Russians are using ballistic missiles in addition to all these drones. And when they conduct these massive attacks, they're sending ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and then within those huge flocks of drones are decoys.
Right.
Not all of them are real. So the Patriot system, which is used to intercept, that's the high-value target. So that's ballistic missiles, air-breathing threats, has 3 different missiles that are part of its mix, or the missile mix. And the one which has got the longest range, highest altitude, most capability is the MSE, which is not made by Raytheon. Raytheon makes the Patriot battery, the radar, the launchers, and some of the other systems, and one of the other missiles. So that particular missile, very valuable, very expensive, very capable, and there were 30 of them that were supposed to be delivered to Poland, and as you know, they were stopped right before they crossed the border by someone in the Pentagon. We're trying to decide who gave the order. Now, supposedly 10 of the 30 will be sent to Ukraine, but 10 missiles is not enough.
So what happens to the other 20? Are they going to just hang out here in Poland?
That's a good question. I don't understand. I mean, obviously, if those missiles were taken out of stock and they were sent, and by the way, these were all deliveries that were signed off by Joe Biden when he was president. This administration has not signed off on any new packages, on any new aid. So obviously, the decision was made, and there are some reasons behind all of this, but it makes no sense. You're right.
Well, hopefully they reevaluate that situation and we see more going in. Now, in terms of the missiles, you mentioned missiles are crucial to Patriot battery being able to do anything. Do we know anything about who's going to supply these missiles for Ukraine? Do you think that's included in the plan that was announced by Germany?
Well, they will. Yeah, you wouldn't buy a battery without any missiles, so they'll have to build more of them. But what I am frustrated about as someone who lived in Ukraine for 21 years and who lost my home and lost everything and almost died as an added bonus. But what frustrates me is that ever since 2022, ever since the Russian invasion failed and then they started losing, I would talk to everybody I know and all of the different major defense companies, and I would say, okay, we've got a hot war, so that means we're going to spin up production. Yes, we are. Well, how long is that going to take? Well, 2 years. Well, it's been 3 years, and we're still at levels of production which are not adequate to support a war in Europe against Russia, to continue to supply the Israelis in the Middle East, and to have enough left over in case there's a problem in the Pacific with the Chinese.
Certainly. So indeed some challenges ahead. Now we know these missiles are very expensive. Russia is constantly firing drones in addition, as you mentioned, to ballistic and cruise missiles on the capital. What other systems can be provided or should be provided to counter this part of the threat?
Well, there's some nice, capable European systems which are shorter range. Like one of the systems that's made in Germany, actually, it's called Iris-T. It was originally designed as an air-to-air missile, but there's a ground-launched version, and it's very, very capable. It's very good, very effective. But it's typical of the problem with a lot of European countries. Its factory is in a town of about 23,000 people. It's on the Swiss border. So before they're going to be able to spin up production and surge into much larger numbers, they're going to have to pick up and move the factory to a larger area or a larger metropolitan area, like someplace close to Berlin or something. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a problem you find all across of Europe, and to some extent even in the U.S. So you've got that. You've got the French have a system called SAMPT, which is also an air and missile defense system. And these are all needed, but they're all needed in greater numbers.
Yeah, so not only a problem in the United States, also here in Europe. Now, turning to what was agreed upon in London, if we get to that elusive ceasefire, which it doesn't seem like there are any signs currently that would indicate that, what do you think about these commitments that were made today? We'll have a headquarters in Paris, another one in Kyiv, and they agreed apparently upon the contingent to be deployed to Ukraine. What are the major things that we should look at in event that we get to a ceasefire and these forces?
Well, that's the key, get to a ceasefire, which I don't believe Vladimir Putin's ever going to agree to. He just, every time he articulates what he wants, it's always these maximalist demands where it's basically amounts he wants Ukraine to unconditionally surrender and unilaterally disarm. Putting the headquarters in Paris is consistent with, this has been a goal of Macron for years now, that he wants Paris to be essentially a diplomatic superpower and wants them to be he wants this division in the EU where Germany is the center of gravity from trade and financial and economic factors, and then over in France is supposed to be the military and diplomatic center of the universe. Now, France, to their credit, are expanding production of their armament systems quite a bit. They're expanding the production lines for the Rafale, the fighter aircraft. Macron announced several months ago that they were reactivating a base that was basically almost dormant in France, which will become a new nuclear base, and they will build more Rafales, and that will become the force de frappe that has the nuclear mission. So that all makes plenty of sense, and it makes sense for there to be a headquarters in Kyiv as well, because you need a coordinating element. But it's not clear to me how that new set, a headquarters here, headquarters there, how does that triangulate, or how does that coordinate with the headquarters that has been set up in Wiesbaden, with the U.S. Army, which was supposed to be the main support center for Ukraine? So these things will have to be coordinated and sorted out. And obviously Europe's going to play a larger role, because the role of the United States always seems to be up for discussion, or it's not a stable commitment.
Well, especially as of late, since Donald Trump began his term. But do you read into the United States joining this meeting as maybe a potential good element of the progress that's been made in the coalition of the willing, or are we still very far from real progress?
It's a hopeful element, but I would have hoped that by this point we would have had American aircraft in the skies shooting down Russian missiles the way that American aircraft shot down Yemeni and Iranian missiles to protect Israel. I would have hoped for a much greater commitment on that score, and I would have hoped for a much greater recognition about the importance of this conflict. There is a body of thought which I don't sign up to, but it's in Washington, it's inside the Pentagon, it's in different foreign policy circles, that says Europe doesn't matter, Europe should take care of itself, and our big fight is with the Chinese, and if we go off and fight the Chinese, everything will be fine. And that same train of thought, the same line of thought says that there's no connection between what happens in Ukraine and what happens with Taiwan, and that's absolutely false. Mm-hmm.
Especially if we look at what NATO Secretary General said just yesterday, saying that if China attacks Taiwan, they will encourage Russia to attack Europe. Then we enter into a global conflict, and so therefore Europe needs to be prepared with extra food supplies, production capabilities, and the ability to wage war against Russia. Is that a likely outcome here in the current geopolitical climate?
Well, I want to quote General Ben Hodges here, and he's famous for saying, he says, well, you see what's going on in Ukraine, you see these destroyed cities, you see this fighting going on, you see these missiles hitting Kiev all the time. He says, okay, this is what failed deterrence looks like. So what's the lesson? Well, we make sure that we don't fail again. And Europe, yes, maybe all of those things are, more food supplies, getting ready, preparing for the worst. There's nothing wrong with that. But Europe has to demonstrate that it's ready to really spend on defense. And they tried their best at the last NATO summit, and they said, okay, 5%. But you heard the commentary, right? It's 5%. Well, kind of. It's 3.5% maybe heavy metal, and then it's 1.5% of other things: rail lines, roads, infrastructure. And we're starting to hear the term defense investment instead of defense spending.
And there's a timeline, right?
Yes.
For certain countries, this won't be done until the end of the decade. And by then, even according to the NATO Secretary General, it could be too late.
And then there's I think the big elephant in the room is that the only way you're going to get to where these countries need to be is more defense spending. Okay, you're going to need more money. Well, how are you going to do? You can't raise taxes on the most overtaxed populations in the world already. So there's this $300 billion pile of Russian money sitting in frozen accounts, mostly in Belgium.
Right.
And thus far, they've agreed that the Ukrainians can receive the interest on what's in those accounts. But at some point, that's just going to have to be confiscated and taken away.
And probably not used for construction, but for military equipment procurement.
Yeah, we had talked originally about that would be the rebuilding fund for Ukraine. But yes, we're going to need it for the heavy metal.
All right, well, I'd like to continue this conversation, but we have run out of time. Reuben F. Johnson, Research Fellow at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, sir.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.